We met just now.
Yeah.
And you were saying, watch some of the films, Everything Is Okay films, and then that led you to lots of other films. And you were sharing with me your experience of what happened at Occupy. And just as a precursor to that, we were talking about whether we thought Dom's behaviour and attitude is constructive or not. Because what he seems to do is to expose certain characters. And we were talking about that. So, and you then shared with me your experience of Occupy, and I'd like you to share it with everybody who's watching.
Okay. Well, initially when I first came across you and what you were doing, it was a video clip from a Buddhist monk friend of mine, Urza, who sent this little clip called Everything Is Okay in the Happy Carriage, which I kind of looked at, and that kind of rebellious streak in me was like something more interesting here. And that then set off hours and hours of watching footage on YouTube, listening to lectures, the work that you did with Charlie on Everything Is Okay in the Love Police, Rob Maynard, Bursting the Bubbles of Government Deception, Veronica Chapman with The Great Delusion, John Harris, of course, with A Carpenter's View. And I suppose I always look at these things from a point of view of trying to debunk them, to prove that they're wrong. And I just couldn't find anything wrong with that. So I was sat at home one day looking at the live stream of the protest at St Paul's. And I think because there'd been so much violence at the American Occupy, and we saw those scenes of the policemen literally spraying chemical weapons in protesters' faces, I just didn't really want that violence to be happening in London. So I went down to St Paul's and kind of got involved in what was going on, running cameras for the live stream, listening to the lectures, being at the General Assemblies, and saw the QC, John Cooper QC, giving a talk, and everybody was kind of loving him. But I was listening to the words that he was using, and I was thinking, well, he doesn't mean them in quite the way that people are actually comprehending them. So I looked at John's website, and it said that he was a freeman of the City of London, of the Worshipful Company of Coopers. So I looked at the Worshipful Company of Coopers website, and on there is the oath that a freeman takes. So the oath that John Cooper took included an oath of allegiance to the Lord Mayor of London. And there was also something in there that says basically if he knows of anything that is a conspiracy against the Queen or the City, then he will do as much as he can to stop that from happening. I paraphrase, but I can get you the exact wording. So I was quite shocked by this, and said so at one of the General Assemblies, and most people that were around there watching were really quite concerned at this. I then wasn't ever allowed to speak at a General Assembly again. Now, I only know a little bit about common law and lawful rebellion, so I spoke with Veronica Chapman and arranged a time during one of the General Assemblies where she would come down and be able to give a bit of a speech about what lawful rebellion is, what common law is, and also, the differences between what law is and legislation, because obviously law, cause no harm, injury, loss, fraud, breach of the peace. Legislation is only given the force of law by consent, so it's optional. So Veronica came down at the appointed time, and then the legal team from Occupy St Paul's shouted abuse at her for half an hour to stop her from having her say. And that just kind of freaked me out, that people weren't allowed to speak their mind. You mentioned Dom.
No, hold on a second. Who was in the legal team?
Well, there was...
Who appointed them?
Well, I think they were appointed by themselves and then kind of voted in by the General Assembly. So there was a guy called Paul Randall Jolliffe, who has an amazing amount of knowledge about common law and legalities. And he was kind of used that anybody that was asking questions would be sent to Paul, and he would annex them off and maybe ask them to do some photocopying or something to get rid of them. But he was the one that shooted abuse at Veronica Chapman for half an hour. Now, you know, Veronica, lovely person. I suspect, like many, she's got her issues, but doing what she does, I can totally understand the frustration of having to explain the basic difference between law and legislation. Paul had already had a conversation with her, so knew exactly what was going on. He knew his history, and yet he still chose, as soon as she started to speak, to yell abuse at her for half an hour. So there was Paul Randall Jolliffe. There's also a guy called Stephen R. Moore, who, again, I just took an instant dislike to, but then found out that he was actually a court-appointed bailiff, and runs a company advising people on, you know, how to get their money back from, you know, if somebody hasn't paid them. So that was kind of part of the legal team underneath the QC.
Was this bailiff living at Occupy?
Oh, yeah. He was there. He was there with a tent every day. His tent was on the front line right next to where Anonymous had their flag. So you had Malcolm Blackman there, who obviously has had, you know, there was all that stuff about, you know, I think he was accused of raping somebody, and then I don't know whether that all went away. Malcolm, I only spoke to a few times, seemed like a nice guy, genuine. I really can't believe it is the head of Anonymous in the UK, but anybody that says they are is probably not telling the truth. But he seemed like a nice guy, so when the rape stuff came out, that was all quite a worry. But yeah, Stephen R. Moore was there, and it was only when Dom, commonly known as Dom, started asking questions about him that he actually admitted that yes, he was a court bailiff. So anyway, we flip back to the QC, who had taken the oath of allegiance to the Lord Mayor of London. Now, the legal team, on the papers that were served, it said on the front of the papers, not to be used unless mediation has taken place. Now, there was no mediation. I was on a couple of the teams within Occupy, including the St Paul's liaison, so watching Tammy Samid and other people trying to get discussion going with St Paul's, and St Paul's just not playing ball, which is not surprising considering St Paul's were saying that they weren't going to evict people, even though the Lord Mayor ex officio is trustee of St Paul's. So because of his office, he is a trustee of St Paul's. So the Lord Mayor of London, trustee of St Paul's, bringing the prosecution, the defence with an oath of allegiance to the Lord Mayor of London. So the prosecution obviously was Lord Mayor of London. But then you had the court that it was taken in, which was actually run by Master Stephen Whittaker. Now again, you look at the master title of what that actually means.
Sorry, I didn't quite that. Would you say that again?
The title master. So obviously, you you have kids. I don't know if you have boys.
Yeah.
And up to a certain age, they're called master.
Yeah.
And then at a certain age, that disappears. But why does that disappear? And why do they then become a mister, or a contraction of mystery, somebody that operates in business and commerce? They're no longer masters. And yet Stephen Whittaker, the master of the court, is a master. So there's something about this master title. And I think Simon Spaniard and White Rabbit is covering that quite a lot. So Master Stephen Whittaker, who's also Corporation of London, so you had the prosecution, the defence, the court, all Corporation of London. No wonder they were going to get evicted. I did stand up on the case management hearing. I'd already sent a note to the judge saying that as a friend of court I had something to say on this. The judge didn't call me, so I did stand up and say my piece, very politely, and pointed out that the conflict of interest of the QC having an oath of allegiance to the Lord Mayor of London prosecuting. At that point, the judge got up and ran from the room. The next time that case was in court, there was a new judge, so he'd obviously recused himself because he'd heard something that he couldn't then carry on with. But obviously the new judge hadn't heard, so therefore they could proceed and evict the St Paul's camp from outside St Paul's. I think the only person that came out of that with any sense of integrity was Giles Fraser. Was he a chaplain or a curate, something or other there, who actually said no, he couldn't evict people, he was going to support Occupy. And obviously he's now got a nice little column in The Guardian, and he's been moved to a church at Elephant and Castle. But he was the only one that came out of that with any integrity.
Great. Thank you.
Cool.